Welcome, everyone. My name is Ann Bowles. I'm a Senior Director of Programs here at CCSSO. I'm excited to see all the attendees coming in. I see we've kind of leveled off, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. We're so excited that you took time out of your day to join us for this webinar today. My role is just to go over a few reminders and housekeeping, and then I'll turn it over to our host and CCSSO CEO, Carissa Miller. Reminders and housekeeping. This session is being recorded. We do have closed captioning available. Participants will be muted throughout the webinar. If you have a question, feel free to ask it using the Q&A function. And please join us on the conversation on social media, #StatesLeading. And Carissa will speak to this. We're also releasing 2 new resources here at CCSSO that we'll reference throughout today's conversation. You can find those on learning.ccsso.org/a-nation-of-readers. And with that, I'll turn it over to Carissa for today's conversation.
Hi there. Thank you, Anne, and welcome, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to A Nation of Readers. It's a Snapshot of States Progress webinar. As Anne mentioned, my name is Carissa Miller, and I'm the CEO of the Council of Chief State School Officers. It's also known as CCSSO. So let me set the stage for our webinar today and some of the resources that we're going to be releasing. Over the last decade, states have taken bold action, adopting and implementing comprehensive science of reading policies to restructure teaching and learning to align with research-based instructional practices. States' leaders' focus on literacy has continued to expand as many states allocated elementary and secondary school emergency relief, also known as ESSER, funds to build strong literacy skills. 4 years ago, I was proud to host CCSSO's National Summit on Literacy. We gathered state chiefs, education researchers, and advocates for an honest conversation aimed at enhancing collective understanding of what is at stake and how states are leading to improve literacy skills for students, with this specific focus on students whose reading ability is below their grade level. The following year, we released a subsequent report called A Nation of Readers: How State Chiefs Can Help Every Child Learn to Read. This focused on actions state leaders could take to improve reading skills. And today, we're going to hear directly from state education chiefs who are in the midst of moving from enacting state policy on literacy to working with districts and schools to implement it, all in the name of deriving positive student outcomes. So some level setting. The science of reading is based on long-standing and a broad body of research on how young children learn to read. The research identifies 5 foundational skills that students master as they become proficient readers. There's phonological awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. The science of reading is not simply a focus on phonics. It is an intentional inner working of all 5 skills. States are taking a coherent, comprehensive approach to bring the science of reading into classrooms in their states, helping to ensure that the education ecosystem is working in concert to support both educators and students. So let me give you some examples. States are deploying resources to train teachers in the science of reading, to get high-quality instructional materials into schools, to provide ongoing professional development for educators on those materials. They're also aligning interventions and supports, working with their educator preparation programs to build a focus on the science of reading for future teachers. And they're ensuring ongoing job-embedded support is included. So this is not just a one-time thing. These efforts span not only the role of the state education agency, which we'll talk about today, but the legislature dedicating funding, districts allocating time, principals and teachers being given the support for implementation, and an involvement of the community. Just as mastering the 5 foundational skills that comprise the science of reading requires systematic instruction, translating policy into effective implementation in classrooms requires this same systematic approach. As of February 2024, all 50 states, the District of Columbia, American Samoa, and Puerto Rico have passed laws or implemented new policies or programs related to evidence-based reading instruction, which is absolutely incredible. Today, states are in the complex process of implementing these policies to realize their full potential. This requires a sustained effort over time and an ongoing commitment and capacity to continue the infrastructure needed to support this work. So Anne mentioned 2 reports that we're going to be releasing today. The first one is a state scan of science of reading legislation and implementation. It includes states with the science of reading legislation in place and those that have implemented new policies and programs aligned with 4 evidence-based practices. The scan also includes details about state obligations to provide high-quality instructional materials, train educators, the obligation of EPPs to aspiring educators, and the state obligation to communicate with partners, all aligned to the science of reading. The second report we're putting out is focused on sustainable state investments in literacy. I'm going to share just a few high-level takeaways from these resources that help provide context for today's webinar and to give a sense of the sheer volume of work that's being done for students across this country. 41 states, DC, American Samoa, and Puerto Rico are actively implementing policies or programs designed to ensure educators and students have access to high-quality literacy instructional materials. 47 states, DC, and American Samoa are providing statewide professional learning and coaching on the science of reading. 42 states and DC are ensuring aspiring educators are trained on the science of reading through amending teacher preparation coursework requirements or licensure tests. And nearly every state is prioritizing literacy in their ESSER state recovery efforts, including at least 32 that have specifically stated that their literacy initiatives center on the science of reading. And this work continues. These investments build upon years of work to strengthen literacy instruction. And although the pandemic precipitated a significant drop in the National Assessment of Educational Progress, NAEP, reading scores for 4th and 8th grade, NAEP scores have been relatively stagnant even before the pandemic. Our new report and literacy scans also detail 5 promising practices states are including in their literacy strategies, which we'll talk about today. The first one is access to high-quality literacy instructional materials. Not all instructional materials are aligned with the science of reading principles, and states are supporting districts by creating state-mandated or recommended material lists, providing rubrics or guidance on selecting high-quality materials, and creating grant programs to incentivize the selection of them. Second, professional learning for teachers and school leaders. Research shows that educators need 2 types of training about the science of reading, including the research on the science of reading and the curriculum-based professional learning to support teachers in translating that research into practice. The third one is high-impact tutoring. Recent studies have found that when administered frequently during the school day, in small group and one-on-one settings with a consistent tutor is an effective means to increase reading proficiency. The fourth practice is initiating early foundational literacy. The early learning years from birth to age 5 are a critical time for a child's learning development and are predictive of later academic success and persistence. Several states are using ESSER state set-aside funds to build literacy skills at pre-kindergarten and kindergarten levels, and have collaborated with Head Start programs and families at home to focus on these critically formative years. And the fifth practice is training future teachers in the science of reading. States have found early success enhancing teacher preparation, enhancing teacher competency standards, and updating educator preparation program coursework, as well as updating licensure requirements. So with that, I'm going to transition us to our fabulous panel today. In our conversation with our panelists, we're going to cover how state education leaders are setting and tracking interim goals to measure success. We'll hear about lessons learned along the way that can help other states on this literacy journey. We're going to talk about the types of partnerships that have been helpful to forge this literacy implementation work. But before I introduce our panelists, I want to just tell you, you can engage with us on social media using the hashtag #StatesLeading. You can also access the social media toolkit in the chat. And this webinar is being recorded, and the recording, along with all related resources and research citations from today's event, will be shared shortly. So with that, let me please introduce our panelists. We have with us today Indiana Secretary of Education, Katie Jenner, Rhode Island Commissioner of Education, Angelica Infante Green, and Texas Deputy Commissioner for the Office of School Programs, Shannon Trejo. Welcome to all of you. And I think Angelica will join us shortly. There she is. All right. Well, thank you, ladies, for joining us today to be able to talk about the work that's going on around your state. So we're gonna kick this off, and I'm just gonna ask Katie to start us off with just this broad brush of like, what do you want people to take away from the literacy efforts happening in your states? So, Katie, I'll turn it to you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to join Carissa, and I'm really looking forward to learning from Texas and Rhode Island as well. In Indiana, we are hard at work on a lot of the different elements that you just mentioned and that are featured in that report. One thing that we have learned very quickly is while this is urgent for Indiana, urgent for our country, to make sure we are doing a better job with reading, you have to be very aware you can't eat the elephant all at once, right? You have to be strategic. So our team came in 2021. We immediately took a look at our data. In 2012, that was our highest point of literacy in our state. We were at 91.4%. We had a decade of decline. Even before COVID, we were in a decline mode. Yes, COVID exacerbated that. But today we sit at about 81.9%. 1 in 5 of our kids are not able to read by the end of 3rd grade. So following that data level set, we set a goal for 95% of our children to read by 2027. So in 2022, we really focused on that game plan. Which included a major investment from the Lilly Endowment. We have to date up to $170 million to spend. That's with Lilly Endowment money as well as our General Assembly to support our current and future teachers. And so we have a game plan that we're just working through. In 2023, in the legislative session, we really focused on teacher supports. How do we train up our current teachers and our future teachers as quickly, but also as effectively as possible? Being mindful that we don't have enough subs to go around to take teachers in and out in Indiana. So how can we build out a 24/7 option for teachers and then provide them stipends as a thank you for their work? So we launched that and have thousands of teachers doing those trainings right now. And then this legislative session, we've really focused in on student interventions. So how do we make sure every single grade that we have a child, every single year that we have a child, that we're being proactive so that we're not having to, quite frankly, clean up a reactive situation, which is what we're having to do in some respects in grades 4 through 12 right now. How can we be as proactive as possible? I'll pause there because I think there will be more time to get into details. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie, for that. I want to just punctuate something you said, which was this scaffolding of a sustained effort. And I think this is going to be a theme throughout what we're talking about here. It's not a one-year thing. It's not just 1 year we did something and then we can move on. It's a scaffold sustained effort. So, Angelica, I'm going to come to you for Rhode Island's vantage on this.
Yeah, so similar, we don't have extra people either ourselves. We're all in this place together. And I feel very lucky to be in this conversation with my colleagues that are really taking the science of reading to the next level. And I have to say that when I first walked into this job, and I'll share this very quickly, my team had already been working on this legislative piece. And they sat down with me and they're like, hey, how do you think about the science of reading? Are you pro or against? And the fact that that question was even asked, I think was very interesting, because I was like, oh, absolutely. Like this is I've known this, I've been trained, I'm Orton Gillingham trained, like I'm certified, like this is where we pushed to get it passed. So in 2019, we worked with the legislature to make sure that our teachers either had to demonstrate proficiency or that they had awareness of the science of reading. And that it became our work. This is where our work has unfolded. And what that means is that if you're a teacher in Rhode Island by 2025, you have to have either proficiency, which there's different ways to measure that, or that there's an awareness. And what that means for us, which is very interesting, is that all classroom teachers have to have proficiency, which is pretty amazing. But then when you're talking about outside of the classroom, music teacher, they have to have awareness. Guidance counselors, like we have a list of who has to have awareness, and awareness is a minimum of 10 hours. So what we're talking about is our whole system changing, where every interaction is based on understanding the science of reading and capitalizing on that. It's not just a classroom teacher. And it fluctuates for the proficiency, it fluctuates anywhere from 30 to 60 hours. And then we worked with higher ed. Like no teaching program can graduate teachers from Rhode Island without showing proficiency on the science of reading. So we have all this happening, 2025, everybody in the classroom and any school building has to have that certification and credentials. And then there's the high quality curriculum, because it all goes in tandem, right? And I think for us, it's all been happening at the same time. So one of the things that we have been doing is really working with our districts with the HQIM adoption. And that for us, as this is happening, all of our districts have to have adopted high quality curriculum. We are down to 2 districts that are on their way in the process. And our role is to help them do that. So we sit with them and we work throughout a school year, because it's not just like pick a curriculum that's on green on ed reports, but why are we picking this curriculum? Who is our population? How are we making these decisions? What group is making this decision? How do we actually implement? Because we all know you can adopt, but then the implementation is where we struggle in education the most. One, because we don't have people, because for a number of factors. So that has been really important for us. And then when you talk about the funding, a lot of our ESSER dollars went to coaches on the science of reading and really unpacking the high quality instructional materials. So that's where we decided that we were going to really focus our energy and funding. So all the dollars that we got, that's what we did. We had professional development, we helped the coaches. So that is what we felt our approach, the most important approach for us. So we tackled it from higher ed, from teacher training and certification, as well as professional development. And it is expected for everyone, even the gym teachers. So it is across the board.
Well, everyone matters in terms of getting kids to be able to read, right? I want to pull out a couple of things that you said that I think are relevant here, which is this connection to high quality instructional materials. And we're going to talk about that a little more too, but this through line to not just passing policy, but policy to implementation, and implementation across so many different groups. But this high quality instructional materials, it's not just about adopting it. It's about learning how to use it. It's about being trained on it and consistently trained on it and being offered that opportunity. So, and I know that's happening in all of these states, but I really appreciate you pulling that out.
Yeah, I just want to add one piece. That's why we spend a year with the districts. That was really important for us, so that they understood why the decision was being made to adopt that and how it connects. Because I think that, in education, we sort of like try to do everything and people don't really understand why we're doing it. And that through line was really important for us, so that they felt that it wasn't just policy coming from the Department of Education, but it was really like, oh, I see the connection. I see how this curriculum is going to help me with this new understanding that I have. And that was really, really, really important for us. And that you have a variety of stakeholders, including parents, as we do that work.
Yeah. So Shannon, you've come to Texas pretty recently, the State Department. You came from a district where you were in the work of actually implementing this. So we're going to get into your unique experience and your unique vantage to that. But talk to us about Texas. Where is Texas on leading on the science of reading?
Well, just awed by my colleagues and the work that they're doing. I would join in that. Texas supports literacy best practices in very similar ways. We have seen our legislators pass HB 3 in 2019, which outlined science of teaching reading as the most effective way to support phonics instruction in a systematic way in schools. Set timelines to teachers being able to demonstrate proficiency across the state. House Bill 1605 brought in kind of the what we don't do anymore, which is the 3 queuing system, and really focused on research-based instructional strategies and the effective quality curriculum. And then House Bill 4545 started to focus on the high impact tutoring to support those gaps, which is something that you mentioned earlier. You know, coming in recently transitioning over as a practitioner in a school district at the state level, it really helps me better understand what we were going after, right, as a state, and what was happening at the district level to focus on explicit and systematic phonics instruction. I think what's unique about Texas is this idea that the state really managed the content itself and said, okay, here is the Reading Academy content, which consisted of 12 modules, 60 hours of content that included coaching, recognizing that having moments to work with an expert in the field in your classroom, submitting student artifacts that help you demonstrate your learning in that moment has that long-term professional learning impact that we really want to see happen. And when you're trying to train 1,200 school districts that touch 5.5 million children in the state of Texas, that's no small feat. What I really enjoyed most about the agency being able to kind of create the modules that go out, especially from a district perspective, is it wasn't just about the phonics. It was, let's look at a clear research base. Do we understand the why? Do we understand the how? Do we understand the theory? Do we have instructional materials that represent that include not only the sequence of the phonics instruction that makes sense when we're talking about phonemes, but also the decodables, not predictables? Do you have decodable text that supports that? And then we get into complex grade level text and vocabulary. What role does that have? What about knowledge coherence versus skill coherence? What role does that have? And then finally, how do we get into writing, into response to reading? And how do all those pieces fit together? And then, of course, how are you monitoring this? What is your way to look at data and really understand how that data can drive instruction around the science of teaching reading in your classroom? So I think it's similar to the other states, you know, being able to focus on principals, being able to focus on kinder through third grade teachers, coaches. Who needs to have this knowledge and why do they need to have it? And are we following through with the right supports to ensure that all learners have the very best pathway to literacy by the time they hit third grade?
Thank you, Shannon. And I'm going to punctuate your point about monitoring and looking at data, because all of you talked about back in 2019, which seems like an eon ago for all of us, right? Like this work started even before then, but it's over the years and monitoring and making sure that progress is being made and making adjustments along the way. And so I appreciate you pointing that out. I think you'll probably talk a little bit about some of the data, the work that you're going to do. So we're going to move on to a few questions. And I do see some questions coming in from the audience that I might just throw in here. But I'm going to start out with the full spectrum of people who have to be involved to make this happen. So you're at the state education agency, you're the center of this. Some of you have already talked about your legislature allocated money. There was laws passed. There were other groups that were involved. But I'd love for you to talk about, like, as the leader of a state education agency, what do you see as your agency's unique role in the state around improving literacy outcomes, and who are your partners in this? Anyone want to kick us off?
I'd be glad to kick us off,
Thanks,
Carissa. So one of the main things is you have to start by, as any leadership, change movement, by listening. Where are our people, and what's the level that we can push, and what do they already know? And then also consensus building. One of the most helpful things that we did is we built out heat maps for the whole state of Indiana, so that we know exactly where to triage, and so that we know, is it predominantly in urban areas? Is it predominantly in rural areas? Where is it across the state of Indiana? So those are publicly available for anyone to see and get. Quite frankly, are the start to most discussions in our state, referencing those heat maps and then just triaging and pushing. In terms of teachers, I mentioned at the start, I mean, they said loud and clear, subs are tough to find. We need 24/7 access. They also very honestly said that, we got some messages from teachers that even though we no longer have 3 queuing, it's in the law in the state, kind of like Texas did. We still have teachers who will message us like, hey, my curriculum director is still really into this old way. Is there anything that you have where we can learn this new way? And so that 24-hour access has been key with that stipend. In terms of, I mentioned Lilly Endowment. I tell you, with federal money going away, our philanthropy community is major for us as states to think about the scaling of this. And then also, when you link arms with philanthropy, you can move a lot faster as well. So they've really helped specifically with our ed prep colleges. I mean, I will get calls like, hey, this teacher at this university is not teaching science of reading, and have the relationships where I can pick up the phone and call the provost or the president or the endowment and say, we might have a problem at this university. Let's circle them and make sure they have the supports they need so that our future teachers are good to go. In terms of our parents and families, someone else already mentioned that. In Indiana, we're hearing a lot from parents and families who would say, listen, I know my child is behind. And I just right now work 2 jobs and I can't help them. And I also don't have the money to get a tutor. So we had a big bet where we launched, it's called Indiana Learns, and it provides up to $1,000 for tutoring. And then we certify the tutors throughout the state, that allows parent choice. It also, gets the students the support, and the parent can be a part of it, which is important. For the community members, a lot of listening. We had one community member who reached out and said, as you're working to improve all the other schools, what about the schools who have hit the goal of 95% of their kids reading? So we just last week hosted 241 schools at our state house, had our Speaker of the House, had the President of the Senate, had a ton of legislators who were there, not talking about what schools need to do, but celebrating the heck out of the schools who are getting it done. It was a major piece. We also have public service announcements. If you come to Indiana, you might see a commercial or hear a radio, TV or radio. We're all over talking about the value of reading, and parents, families, read to your child, talk to their child about. So just kind of reminding there. I'm missing a number of things. Probably the other I just have to acknowledge is the state of Mississippi. We talk about it a lot, but listen, as a country, many of us are taking a page out of their book. And I just appreciate their leadership, and certainly with their instructional coaching and some of the laws that they passed. We are that is a lot of our game plan with the literacy cadre and the coaches. And I just have to give a shout out to them.
Absolutely. And Helica, you want to give us a vantage of where you sit? You talked a little bit about this in your opening, but like, what are some of the really important partnership pushes, I guess?
Yeah. So the legislature, I think it was really important because once the Right to Read Act came out, there was no conversation about us not doing it, right? So it takes away a little bit of the, yeah. And then what happened during that time period, obviously we all know we got hit with a pandemic. One of the things that we did with our state dollars, aside from doing the professional development, we paid for assessments for all our districts so that we had real-time data, because as you recall, there were no state assessments. At that point, there was no NAEP, there was nothing. So we used our dollars to get this assessment and say, hey, you have until 2025 to get this certification, but look at where our kids are performing right now due to the pandemic. And, you know, we were open the entire time. And for us to actually look at that and say, hey, third graders, we're you know, because everybody thought it was going to be the older kids, but our data was pretty clear. And we're like, okay, this is important. And when we saw everybody's data, school data, district data, there was even more of an impetus to kind of move faster. And that's what we wanted to really have people understand was the legislature put this out. These are our partners. Philanthropy is also our partner, but our superintendents are our partners. The parents are our partners. Higher ed had to become, you know, really, we're all doing this at once. Like, you can't have a teacher graduate from your program without having the science of reading. Let's see if we all understand what the science of reading is, because sometimes we have different understandings about things. So we all had to sit around the table and really create this partnership of, this is what we want for Rhode Island, and this is how we're going to do it. And for us, it wasn't a pre-K 3 approach. It was a pre-K 8 approach. So because what do you do if you're a middle school teacher? You don't know how to teach reading, but you have a number of kids that don't know how to read. Like, what do you do then? So I think that for us, that approach was really, really important, because it just could not be at the early childhood, because we have these gaps that have existed. And what do we do? And that's why we've even pushed high school to have that awareness. Like, for us, it's a K-12 approach. These teachers are non-negotiable, and these have to have at least awareness. And that was really, really important for us, because that's where the partnership comes in. And then we also looked at the business community. That was really important for us. So how do you push on these levers all at once? So then we had the policy, we had the legislation. Our job as a state agency is policy. How do we put in the policy that supports that legislation? And then what are the supports that we're putting in? So we coupled the professional development that we did, that we were able to support. We also approve the professional development that can be used across the state, so that we're maintaining quality, some quality assurance. And then there is the piece of, obviously, we work with Ed Reports, we work with different partners that do this work to help us move along faster. So for us, it was all these multifaceted approaches that were hard, but it is the work. And we've shifted our agency to being an agency of support. So that means that it's just not compliance, it's just not policy. If we're asking you to do something, we have to enact it in our everyday work. And that means that we're out in the districts, we're looking at your data. How are you targeting? Who are those tutors that are helping you? Do they know about the science of reading? Like, are they going through that piece? TAs for us, teacher assistants, they have to go through the science of reading. Like, what role do you play? So it is all the partners coming together and saying, this is a need. And I think one other piece that I think is important for Rhode Island is that we are next to Massachusetts, for those of you that know geography. We have the same state assessment. And that has been very helpful for us because, as everybody knows, Massachusetts is the highest performing state in the nation. And that has helped us want to. This didn't feel like it was being forced. It felt like an all hands on deck solution that we were going to work together to try to reach the same proficiency, but we needed a strategy. And this is our number one strategy. It is the science of reading coupled with the instructional materials. One can't live without the other.
And Helga, I'm going to come back to you after I ask Shannon a question, because there is a question in the chat about, like, what did you sunset to make this your priority? So I'm going to come back to you and ask you about that, because you just talked about how your agency changed a little bit. But Shannon, before we go there, I want to have you show your unique vantage on this. We're asking, what's the SEA role? But you were in a place where you were connected to the SEA before you became the SEA. So give us that unique vantage of, like, what it feels like to be in the district trying to implement this, and then on the SEA side.
Yeah, definitely. So again, just echo everything that's already been stated. And I think coming in from the district level, one of the partners that we started to turn to and at the local level was pediatricians, and really thinking about kind of that birth to 3, and then the 3 to 3rd grade. And then, as Ms. Infante mentioned, the 4 to 8 realm. And in what ways are we setting up kind of pre-literacy skills, foundational practices in the home with families and parents as partners, and really thinking about language development over time from birth up until school age, and how does that work? So I think that was probably a unique opportunity for a local education agency to think outside the box. We also partnered, or many of our districts, so moving into the state agency role, partner with our education service centers. So there are 20 education service centers in the state of Texas that really became kind of the structure for managed calibration around training, around accessing high quality materials, getting advice, getting support, getting motivation, helping to create a vision, and not just within the district, but across the region. So as you come together as local agencies, you do sit back and talk about, well, what are you doing and how are you doing it and what are you doing? And the people that are right around you are the ones that impact you the most, because a lot of our students, as you know, are traveling between districts, and a lot of the leaders are going to each other to think about how are we approaching literacy and who's doing it best. And how can we share those practices? So I do think, uniquely from the LEA, we look at the region. From the state side, we use those educational service centers, regional service centers, to help create that vantage point and access to resources that maybe we didn't have as an individual unit in the district. And then we're really thinking about, again, that intersection of how our reading academies, how's our training getting together with this idea of high quality instructional materials, and what is the role of the state in creating these high quality instructional materials in a way that legislators perhaps create a quality rubric, and then we all kind of elevate our expectation around what should these materials be foundationally based upon in terms of research, and what should they include? Because we all know not all materials are created equally. And until we start to have more of a shared understanding of what those materials should include, I do think it's important for the state to step in and provide opportunities to calibrate around expectations for quality.
Thanks for that. I appreciate that. And I appreciate that vantage from the district perspective. I'm going to list a few things based on this question from what I heard. Like, the role of the SEA is not to do it all, right? I think in some ways we've other initiatives may have fallen a little flat because we've decided that the SEA just needs to take it all on and we just like run it, right? And this initiative, which we've seen over time, has been much more successful because the SEA has played a pivotal role, but not the only role. The role of leading in what they want, a convening role among all stakeholders, many of which have been listed here, a supporter to districts, to teachers in what they need, a connector to materials, and maybe some quality control, setting some boundaries for what is good quality. So there's not this kind of question. And I would say a communicator as well. So those are just a few of the roles I think I heard many of you say on this. So Angelica, I'm going to come to you for this question on what have you let go? And it looks like Katie probably wanted to get on that. And then we're going to talk about how do you measure? How do you know you're making progress? So that's the next question coming up. Angelica, what have you let go?
Yeah, this is the toughest thing because one of the things about state agency is that we don't like to let go of things, right? So we are continuously having this conversation. Like, what are the things that we need to stop doing? Like, what's important for us? Like, what are the things we want to achieve in the next 12 months and the next 24 months? And what's going to get us there? Like, what are the things, I dare not to say, that are just paper exercises or things that don't get us anywhere, or that, there's things that we do as a state agency that nobody looks at. I don't want to say that too loudly, but it's the truth, right? Like, because we keep piling things on and piling things on. We're not good at taking things off our plate. So there's a couple of things that if we don't look at those documents, what can we automate? What do we not need people to do anymore? How does this feed into our goal? If you're doing 20 things and only 8 of them really gets us to change, then we really have to do that. The problem is that some people like doing some of those things, and there's what we need to do and what we like to do. And then that's where I come in and say, okay, that's not what we're going to do. But it's very hard. It's very hard. And we keep having that conversation every 6 to 8 months. We actually had that conversation this morning in my office, like, all right, what else can we pivot, or what else can we, that 1% change that will give us the most is what we have to look at. And as a state agency, as a bureaucracy, we struggle with that. I will be honest. I don't, we don't wake up.
It's a tough question. It's a good one.
It is.
Katie, I wanted to ask you, and this may be relevant in the realm, but you had a legislation on standards reduction. And that may be one of the pivotal roles in, like, how do we actually start to manage that? Do you want to talk just briefly about that?
Yeah, it's interesting, Chris. I wasn't even going to mention that. I was going to, quite frankly, double down on what Angelica mentioned. It's how are we spending our funding as states, and is it driving a return on investment? If it's not, what are we doing? And having real, honest conversations. The only other thing, and then yes, I'll switch, is the other thing that state agencies have to do a lot of is we have to protect our space for like the future as well. Our General Assembly has been, every year we talk about reducing unfunded mandates, and every year I'm fighting off 50 bills that have unfunded mandates. So I might bring forward 15 to get rid of, and they're like, well, how about we add these? And I respect that. I think it's worth the discussion always, but it's a real honest conversation. If we boil the ocean, we're not going to get anything done. We have to focus in. Yes, one of the things our General Assembly did pass, and by the way, they're great partners of mine, which is, I think, part of why we've been able to move quickly, is they required us to reduce a number of standards by a certain percentage across content areas, because basically we were asking teachers to teach all of these things that no human could get done in 180 days. So we brought together teachers, parents, experts, and really streamlined our standards. Now we're building out, we used to have a one summative assessment at the end of the year. I think we'll be the 13th state to have a through-year assessment with key checkpoints throughout the year, to Angelica's point, so that we can support schools in the triage. the triage work and make sure they're getting the support, not finding out when it's too late.
And this created space for the science of reading work that you wanted to do as well, right?
Well, it more than created space, it focused us in.
Yeah.
It got rid of some of the brush, so we're focused in.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about 5 years from now. We started with 2019 for many of you, and then let's talk about 5 years from now. What does that look like for you? What does that look like for your state? Katie, you want to kick us off?
Well, I had to do the quick math. We're in 2024, so in 2029, what do we want to be?
Let's call it 2030, just around it.
2030. Yeah. Well, I mentioned early on, and you'll hear this echoed from our governor, our Speaker of the House, and our President of the Senate. We have a goal in Indiana, 95% of our students reading by 2027. You'll also, we have multiple school boards. We challenge the local school boards to pass resolutions, also supporting their teachers and schools to get there. So we have multiple resolutions around the state so that we're all rowing in that direction. So that is key. We also really, and we watch our inputs and our outcomes. So we have the literacy cadre that I mentioned that was launched. Today we have around 200 schools. Next year we'll have 425 schools. In the following year, we'll have 600 schools. So we have a spreadsheet of every school in Indiana, and this is kind of old school, but it's not as fancy as the heat maps, but we literally have an old school spreadsheet of every school in Indiana and what they're taking advantage of and what they're not. We're watching all of that. And it's to support them. So we want to continue making sure our investments are yielding results. We also have quite a few researchers coming around us to have honest conversations if something's not producing results as it should. I'll pause there.
Because
Texas and Rhode Island jump in.
I feel like we need to see a picture of this, this heat map or this spreadsheet.
The heat map, I've put that in the chat. I was trying to answer people's questions and then I couldn't listen, so I stopped. But the heat map, yeah, please take a look.
Yes, we'll make sure that we share that. So, Angelica, what does it look like for you in 2030?
So funny, we have a 2030 goal, and it's very simple. We're going to outperform Massachusetts.
I love that goal. That's awesome.
It literally is the goal, right? So the governor gave us that goal. And but what that means is that we have to improve our literacy scores. We've made improvements in math, but literacy is an area that we really needed to look at. So that's why from now we will have hopefully the highest NAEP scores at the end of the day in literacy. That's our goal. And I know it's a lofty goal, but that's what goals are. But I think that the important piece for us is not just to set things up and then walk away from it. Right. So one of the things that we're doing right now is understanding how the high quality curriculum is actually being used in the classrooms. So we have just deployed a survey, an anonymous survey of how it's being used, how often it's being used, because we all know that once that door closes, it is very hard to kind of, we like to tweak things a little bit. Are we using the curriculum with fidelity? Are we having the professional development? So we are in the process of doing that right now so that we continuously support, so that we can get to that 2030 goal, because it is, what are the barriers? Like, I see my role as removing barriers from districts, giving resources, but also taking the temperature. What's happening? And because it's anonymous, I think that we will get as much information as possible. And where we also have to strengthen what we're doing with the districts and overall our messaging too. Because if we see teachers deviating, then we need to strengthen our message on how this is very correlated to the science of reading, how this builds one on top of the other, and how it allows us to get there. And are we seeing this more with newer teachers? Are we seeing this more with teachers that have been in the system longer? Like where, or is it working across the board? But we will be able to measure that by 2030. And we have seen in the last 2 years, we have made steady progress. We have made 2.5 percentage point progress for the last 2 years, which is pretty amazing, actually. So we're hoping to keep moving in that direction. And it is, everybody has targets. So everybody in our state has targets that they must meet. And what we try to do is to say, okay, X number of your teachers have already reached proficiency. How many of your kids that are at this level have been in front of a teacher that has already demonstrated proficiency in the science of reading? So the data is being used for that purpose. As we meet with the superintendents and the principals, it's like, okay, these kids are struggling. Which are the teachers? What kind of decisions? Who are you going to pay to move faster? What are the things? Are you going to allocate professional development time? Like, how are those decisions being made? Those are the kinds of conversations that we're having to be able to reach that 2030 goal.
Thanks for that. Shannon, I'm going to come to you. We are quickly running out of time. I've done a miserable job of managing time today. So Shannon, I'm going to ask you the same question, which is like, how will you know in 5 years, 6 years from now? And then there's also questions about how you're specifically working with science of reading for English language learners. And I know that you've been working on that as well. So we can answer that quickly, and then we're going to wrap this with one last question. So.
Sure. I think 5 years from now, we're focusing on the long game in Texas. We've got a goal with the coordinating board, higher ed, 60 by 30 Texas, where at least 60% of Texans ages 25 to 34 are going to have a certificate or a degree. I don't think anybody would argue that if students cannot read, they cannot accomplish that goal. And until we place a strong emphasis on foundational literacy skills and run that all the way through our programming, K through 12, students will not have access to their post-secondary pathway that they need to have. I would say Texas was addressing the what we call emergent bilingual students, English language learner students, in the same way that we're addressing all other students. So phonological awareness works for both groups of students. And so we actually have a biliteracy pathway for our teachers who work in dual language or bilingual programming here in the state. But I do think it's important to note that phonological awareness is not language specific, but it is universal across languages, right? Phonological awareness requires one to reflect on and manipulate structural features of a spoken language. And once you learn that, it does not need to be relearned in a second language. And so I think it's really, really important that these relationships between the languages are taught through a cross-linguistic connection, which is the intent of the biliteracy pathway in the reading academies in Texas. The whole outcome should be that our students have the opportunity to speak English and be able to function in a classroom in English and maintain their home language as appropriate. So that is where we're going with it.
And Helga, did you want to jump in on the ELL? I know it's near and
dear. Oh, I do want to jump in here.
But you're going to have to be brief. I'm
going to be very, 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 very brief. So what we did is that we prioritized our multilingual learner teachers in the science of reading. And what we saw was the outcomes changed last year. So we followed those kids with those teachers, and we saw that they exited out faster and they outperformed all the other students. So those of you that are thinking about this, for this population, it is essential. However, I will tell you that it is not the same in English as it is in other languages. So this is an area that this is where I live. And there are things that cross languages and there are things that do not. And I think that when we start doing this work, if you're able to differentiate the two, you're going to see these kids soar. So if you can prioritize the science of reading and then the linguistic features that come from their home language, you're going to see those kids jump because they're really not the same. There's some things that are similar, but other things that are not. And we have the data to show it. So this is an area that you really want to push these teachers in or give them the support, sorry.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing the data. And I know this is a passion for you. It's where you've started, and you will always remain a passion. So we are going to wrap with this question of, what advice do you have to any of the partners listening to us, to your fellow SEAs? You heard like astounding numbers, already have laws and policies in place. States are at different places in the progress, and you all have made some pretty impressive strides. What advice do you have to your colleagues? Shannon, I want to start with you?
Yeah, I would say data and monitoring are probably the most important thing. I think we can all put together a wonderful professional development plan. We can select high quality materials, but unless we're monitoring and really paying attention to the student outcomes in a way that show us what the leading indicators are, it's hard to come back and refine those practices in a way that actually impacts students in the long run. So I would go with data and monitoring.
Thank you. Angelica.
I would agree. I think data and monitoring, but I think that there's also part of our role as a state agency is to ensure that the policy that we promulgate that really is aligned to where we want to go. Because sometimes we inadvertently put policy out there that sometimes doesn't go along with where we want to move. So it is data, monitoring, and policy.
Thank you, Angelica.
And I would say yes, and to both what Shannon and Angelica said, and just add a lot of our role, and it's every single partner on this call is helping to onboard people. So we can put all the money in, pass all the policy and administrative guidance, but what happens when the school or teacher close their door and actually work with kids? And it's all about making sure people are with us, and that we're providing the support that they need, and that dialogue and communication is open.
Well, I want to thank our panelists. We have so much. We could go on and on about this, and I can tell from the questions that we have a very engaged audience. I'm sorry I wasn't able to get to more of those, but more to come. And we are releasing the 2 reports that we talked about today, a state scan that outlines the details of what's going on in each state. And then it's also about sustainability. So I want to end us where we started, which is to talk about this big picture, like why we do this in the first place, why the SAA is involved, why we need to monitor and build these collaborations. You know, Shannon talked about these foundational for future success. Like if what we want for our kids is to be able to have degrees and to be able to go on and be successful in their careers, these are foundational skills. And so it starts there. That's why it's a priority. And the second thing that I want to just point out that was taken away from this conversation is that is a sustained scaffold investment. Like it is not going to happen overnight. It has to be continually focused on, and you have to have everybody moving in the same direction, and you have to continue to make sure that the pipeline of teachers are given the right kinds of resources, the high quality instructional materials, the training, all of that matters deeply. So with that, I will say thank you to our panelists, and thank you to all of you for joining us today.